Take 3,986, apparently. Hey friends, it's your good friend Tim Campbell-Smith, and today we are reviewing representation of mental health in movies. I'm a huge movie buff. I love watching movies and talking about movies and thinking about movies. And I find it fascinating how mental health gets represented in movies. So today, I want to recommend 8 different movies that touch on or incorporate mental health and get your thoughts on it as well. Some will be literally about mental health, some, and most will not. And we're covering, I would like to say, pretty diverse movies. So we have horror movies, we have animated comedies, we have rom-coms, we have movies from, I think, as early as the mid-90s up until 2022 or 2023 is the most recent movies, and we're gonna just explore how they talk about mental health. Before we go too far, make sure you like and subscribe for all things mental health, photography, business, and life. Let's dive in to our 8 movies, and please know I'm gonna give you a brief synopsis or touch on what the movie's about, but I'm not giving any spoilers. I highly recommend you go watch all these movies, especially if you haven't seen them, and if you have, watch them again and think about how they represent mental health. I'm going to start with the hardest one for me to watch and to engage with. That doesn't mean it's not important. It's just really tough emotionally to watch, and that is Dear Evan Hansen, a 2021 dramatic musical based off the hit Broadway show. Evan Hansen is a young high school student who gets a writing prompt from a psychiatrist of his, and to help with his mental health, and that piece of writing ends up in the wrong hands. That intertwines him and connects him, to someone who recently passed away from suicide. It's a brilliant film done in 2021. The acting and the music is fantastic. Tough to watch. Starting off with something as heavy and as serious as suicide. And that's where I think the strengths of this movie are in addressing mental health, is that how suicide affects communities of people. We get to see a little bit, but not much, of Connor Murphy, the young man who passed away from suicide. But it's more about how Evan Hansen experiences it, and how, Connor's family experiences it, how Evan's family experiences it, and how suicide affects communities of people. Something the movie does well, and is a very real reality right now in mental health that I think is worth a conversation, is how we tend to demonize people who either attempt suicide or pass away from suicide. We tend to demonize them, to blame them. In the movie, there's frequent statements around Connor, the young man who passed away, saying, how could he do this to us? Why would he do this? And, his stepfather even says, look at all the things I did for him, and he still, threw it away. That's really hard to watch. And I think that's what makes it important. Sometimes we need to think about, how do we talk about people who experience mental health difficulties? How do we demonize them? How do we penalize them? And how can we show them more compassion? How can we show ourselves more compassion? As hard as this movie is to watch, I think the other thing that it illustrates really well is that we do tend to care about people on the margins. We don't always show it. We're not good at showing it, but we do care. The movie illustrates that Connor Murphy, the young man who passed away from suicide, wasn't terribly popular, was kind of isolated, may have identified or been identified as a loner. But when he passes away, a lot of people have a lot of strong feelings about that. And it shows that we do care about people. We do care about folks on the margins. And maybe, we can do a little bit better of a job showing them, so that it doesn't take a tragedy like suicide to think about that, to talk about it, and to act on it. So, Dear Evan Hansen, a 2021 musical, really hard to watch. I think addresses suicide in a really tough way and in a really important way for conversation. Now, let's totally switch gears and talk about Up. Up is a 2009 Pixar animated kids movie following Carl, a balloon salesman. I actually really want to draw your attention just to the first 10 minutes of the movie. We'll talk about the rest of the movie and how we can see the effects of mental health from there. I kind of say this in a cheeky way, but with some seriousness, that Up did more to talk about grief and grief's effect on our mental health in 10 minutes as an animated kids movie than most other movies do. And I think that's so brilliant, and what makes it enjoyable to watch, and a little bit easier to digest than maybe say Dear Evan Hansen. In the beginning of the movie, we see Carl with his wife, and we see them from being a young couple to getting older and to Carl's wife passing away and dying. Gotta watch it because how they depict love and loss and how love and loss affect us, it was so incredibly beautiful. The adventure Carl goes on because of love and loss, and how he handles himself and how he finds himself again after loss is beautiful. And this, now I will say this is thinking maybe a little deeper about the movie than most people would when they watch it. On the surface, it's kind of a silly kids comedy, but as with most silly kids comedies, especially coming out of Pixar and Disney, there's definitely some deeper undertones. So I definitely recommend watching Up to think about love and loss and how that can affect us in life. When it comes to Up, I will leave you with this parting thought. Carl is a great demonstration of and proof that we are more than one experience and we are more than one thing. In Carl's case, he's married to his wife and devoted to his wife. But he's more than that. But go watch the movie to see more about that. Next, let's talk about The Butterfly Effect, a 2004 film starring Ashton Kutcher. This is a film about Ashton Kutcher's character, a young man. We see both the boy and the man, who discovers he can travel through time by reading journals. Through his life, because of concerns over memory loss, he journals everything. And he finds that he can travel through time by reading the journals that he writes. Of course, with, even the theoretical notion of traveling through time, if you travel and you do things differently, you change events. And that's what the movie is about. It's based on the premise, and there's a quote about it at the beginning of the movie, this idea, and I'm going to totally butcher this, but a butterfly's wing flaps can cause a typhoon on the other side of the world. Tiny little changes can cause big ripple effects. I'm not going to give it any more away. You got to watch it. It's haunting. It's creepy. And I think it discusses mental health in a really fascinating way. On one hand, if you don't want to think about it, or you just take it at surface level, it's a movie about time travel and about a man trying to make the most of his life through time travel. That makes it sound like it could be a really delicate, Disney movie. It's not. It's a really harsh movie. On the other hand, and I think what it really calls into question, and anybody who thinks for even a second about the movie will come to this conclusion as well, it's about a man who is trying to kind of reconcile and wrestle with all the choices he's made in life and all the mistakes he's made in life. Kind of makes you answer the question of, if you could go back in time, what would you do differently? Ashton Kutcher's character as both a young boy and a man make some really profound mistakes and not great choices. And it's fascinating to see how do we handle those choices? And let's be honest, let's just get to it. It's guilt and shame. How do we handle guilt and shame? Who do we try to help? Who's important in our lives? It calls into question about relationships. And why are those relationships important? And I love that Ashton Kutcher's character has to wrestle with what is important in life. Is it people? Is it our relationships to people? Is it protecting the innocent, doing right by many, or doing right by maybe one person we love? Definitely watch this movie. It's hard, it's gripping, it's a thriller. Watch it and think about, how do we handle our mistakes? How do we sit with and live with mistakes that we make, and maybe the guilt and shame that comes with it? Next, let's talk about a movie that screwed with my brain when I first saw it as a kid, which is The Truman Show. The Truman Show is a 1998 dramatic comedy starring Jim Carrey, who plays a character named Truman. Truman goes through life thinking he's got a very ordinary and nice life, and some things start to unravel. And this isn't giving it away too much because you really see it in the movie, but Truman eventually thinks he's on a TV set. That his entire life is on a gigantic set for a television show. And then the movie, unravels from there and as he starts to unravel, trying to figure out his reality. What I love about this movie is it calls into question our concept of reality and how we respond to our reality. I'm not going to take a side here, and I'm not going to entertain this in the comments, but to make a more timely example, from 2021 or so to 2023, the world had to wrestle with the COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot of folks kind of thought or discovered that it wasn't real, and they started questioning vaccines, and that had caused rifts in society. We see those kind of rifts happening in the United States, where people's realities and their concept of what is real and what is important is different. And I think the Truman Show is totally worth revisiting now, even though it came out in 1998. It's a fascinating, I think, review of what is reality? What is our concept of reality, and how does reality affect our lives? Because remember, with mental health, it's not just what's in your head. Your mental health is largely influenced by the world around you and by the things that happen to you and by parts of your reality. But what happens when you call into question the parts of your reality? Next, and I hope I don't get in trouble for this, but we got to talk about Fight Club. I know we're not supposed to talk about Fight Club. We're going to talk about Fight Club, a 1998 violent drama. Okay, I'm going to just reference actor names and character names because it's been a hot second since I did watch it. Fight Club is about Edward Norton's character and his relationship to Brad Pitt's character, Tyler Durden. Tyler is kind of a better version of Edward Norton's character, who is more confident and outgoing and, grabs life and goes for it. And through the movie, we start to find some problems with Edward Norton's character. I don't want to give it away, so I'm going to dance around it. You gotta watch it. But between Edward Norton's character and Brad Pitt's character, we get inside the experience of someone who's really living with severe mental health difficulties. Don't want to say what it is if you haven't seen it, but you really get inside someone's head who's struggling, who's hurt, and who's broken. I love this movie for mental health because it allows us to reflect on how it feels to experience mental health difficulties and how it impacts our reality, which we discussed with the Truman Show. In a weird way, and in an exciting way, I think this also shows us that there can be strength in mental illness, that there are positives, there are upsides. Dare I say, there are benefits to it. From our mental illness, we may find strength, and it may drive us. Kind of unrelated, but I'll say, RuPaul once had a famous quote. His therapist had said to him, the power available to you in drag is available to you out of drag. So remember, the different parts of you give you power and give you opportunity as well. And Fight Club really shows that. Definitely recommend watching it. I have warned you, it's extremely violent. Next, let's talk about a movie. It took me a year to figure out how I felt about it, and that is Silver Linings Playbook. Starring Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence, released in 2012. It's a drama, it's a comedy, it's a romance. This movie, I think, is one of the best for normalizing life with mental illness. And shows that people are more than mental illness, and they're more than one thing. And are equally deserving of a wonderful life just as much as anyone else. We see both characters, Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence, we see them experiencing different mental health issues, going through and trying different solutions. There's discussion of medication and of exercise and of social connections. And so I loved that we could explore different outlets and avenues and ways of living with or handling mental illness. But we also see how life kind of happens around mental illness as well. For both characters, and I think for anyone who experiences mental illness, life keeps going. We can't just stop. And this movie shows what happens when life keeps going, when we have mental illness, and what all of life in all of its richness can look like. There's two things in this movie I really want to draw your attention to. First, there is this notion, and I hate this, and I say hate rather intentionally here. There's this notion that you have to love yourself before anyone else can love you. We hear this in the dating space a lot. People will say, you're not finding a partner, you're not finding love because you don't love yourself. That's garbage. That's nonsense. Everyone has dark days. Everyone has bad days where we maybe don't love ourselves as much as we could. You are still deserving of love. And this movie, Silver Linings Playbook, shows that everyone is worthy of love, even if we don't love ourselves as much as we could. The second thing this movie does, we get to see the families of both characters, Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is how sometimes we make other people's mental illnesses about ourselves. There's one scene where Robert De Niro's the father, I forget the woman who plays the mother, Robert De Niro saying, like, look at what you're doing to your mother when referring to someone else's mental illness. I think that's fascinating. And I think we also have to be careful of demonizing someone else's mental health experiences and mental illness and making it about ourselves. So the movie calls that into question really well. It's a great movie. Highly recommend. Go watch it. Two more movies. My favorite genre is horror. So I recently saw a horror movie that represented mental health in a really interesting way. And I'm talking about It Lives Inside, a 2023 horror film. First, let's talk about, I love how it calls into question and it makes you focus on how other people respond to perceptions of mental health and mental illness. Tamira is a character who is being haunted. It's a horror movie. That's pretty common. That's an odd thing to say. And obviously, a lot of people don't believe that she's being haunted. And so we see the way that she gets treated because they think it's a mental illness. And I think, again, that brings us back to this reminder that we need to be kind, and we need to be kind to folks. A teacher character really shows us the dangers of not believing someone when they're struggling and not reaching out. And we see how important it is to connect with folks and how important it is to connect with folks who may not be doing well. We then see, other characters who get haunted, and that really brings into, everybody's attention of, well, do you believe them? Do you believe that they're experiencing what they're experiencing? And then how do you treat them? One thing I learned in mental health is don't deny someone's experience. My go-to phrase is, and I say, I believe you that you're experiencing this. So if someone says, I'm being hunted, don't say, you're crazy. Because remember, crazy is a wildly inappropriate word to use. If someone says, I'm being hunted, don't say, you're crazy, you're not being hunted. Imagine how awful it feels to have the feeling of being hunted. So you might say to them instead, wow, I can only imagine how terrifying it is to have to be constantly checking over your shoulder and checking yourself because you may be being followed or hunted. I imagine you're experiencing a lot of fear right now. Because remember, it's always important to empathize with someone's experiences and with their emotions. Give them dignity and space. Now, we cannot talk about movies and mental health without bringing it home with the final movie, Inside Out. I'm not gonna lie, I think it's kind of wild that an animated 2015 Pixar movie moved psychological well-being and mental health awareness forward more so than most other efforts in businesses and organizations combined. Inside Out is a 2015 film about a young girl named Riley whose family moves her to San Francisco. But it's actually about the emotions in Riley's head, and we focus on 5 emotions: anger, disgust, sadness, happiness, and fear. I mean, 1, just watch the movie. I don't need to tell you, I don't think, what you need to take away from the movie. 1, just watch it if you've not seen it. And if you have seen it, go watch it again. Here's what I want to draw your attention to. And I only learned about this from my own therapist, and I want to kind of teach you something here. And this is called parts work, or the idea that people are made of many parts. There's maybe a part of you that's social. There's a part of me that's a little introverted. There's a part of us that may be antisocial. There may be a part of us that's easily scared. A part of us that's easily excited. We are made of many parts, and we are made of many different emotions. And this movie draws attention to that. Every part of us, every emotion is beautiful and wonderful and has a space and place. The movie also, and here's what I love, especially combining this with parts work. The movie gets us to think about, what do these parts do? What are they responsible for? The biggest emotion I wrestled with in this movie, and I had to think about it in myself as well, is what does sadness do? What is the role of sadness? Remember, all emotions are information. They're neither good nor bad, it's information. I love your thoughts on this, but after watching the movie and thinking about sadness in my life, I think a big job that sadness does is it tells us and it reminds us of what's important, what we deem important in our lives and why it's important. And I think that gets shown in this movie as well. So let me know your thoughts on the role of sadness and the movie. But I definitely recommend Inside Out. And that's our 8 movies. Mental health gets represented in all kinds of movies, from horror to comedy to drama to musicals. And I want to encourage you just to think a little deeper about how it gets represented, what gets represented, who do we focus on in the conversation, who's helped, who's not helped, who gets ignored, and how do we talk about it. Comment and let me know, are there other movies you think have really great representations of mental health? Because I'd love to keep watching them and talking about them. As always, make sure you like and subscribe for all things mental health, business, photography, school, and life. Otherwise, we'll chat soon. Bye for now.